Hello, hello. Welcome to the Bitcoin Advocate podcast. This is episode 1. My name is Andy and I'll be your host today. Some of you may know me from Andy's Fire Club, which is the other channel that I have where I talk about personal finance, investing, stocks, stuff like that. This is something new that I'm trying. So I noticed how on the Andy's Fire Club channel, people split into two camps because I talk about both stocks and Bitcoin. So I think it might be more efficient if I just talk about sort of just one thing on one channel. I was thinking about this for a long time, and initially I was hesitant because it's a lot of work to run a YouTube channel, never mind two. However, I decided to make this channel an audio only podcast, which saves me a lot of time because I don't have to edit video. So I think this is an appropriate compromise. It's much easier for me in terms of workload if I don't have to edit video, and I can still give each topic the time that it deserves. So as the title of the channel implies, this is a podcast dedicated to educating people about Bitcoin. We're going to talk about both current events and some of the more philosophical elements regarding Bitcoin. And again, as you've probably already noticed, it's audio only, so feel free to let this run in the background while you're doing something else. The aim of the episode is to be posted weekly on Wednesdays, and each episode will be anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour long, although this can change depending on the circumstances. In the future, I'm going to try and have guest speakers on as well, but for now, you're stuck with me. So just listen to my voice and let me guide you through the wonderful world of Bitcoin. It's going to be great, guys and gals, I promise. So let's get started. So for the first episode, I want to share my personal story of how I got into this space. So I'm going to explain who I am and what my interest in this space is and why I think is so exciting. So again, my name is Andy. I'm 27 years old currently, and I'm from Ontario, Canada. I graduated from the University of Waterloo, also in Ontario, Canada, in 2019, and I majored in math and business. So finance-related stuff, basically. And throughout my university career, I interned at big Canadian companies such as the Royal Bank of Canada and Loblaws, which is the largest grocery company in Canada. I'm someone who is fully or who was fully invested into the traditional finance space. My dream was to work for RBC or Royal Bank of Canada or some other similar company. If I can get into Goldman Sachs, that would be even better, right? So that's kind of the mindset that I had back in 2017 or 2016, back when I first entered university. So how did a person like me get into Bitcoin? So you'd think that I'd be the last person to get into Bitcoin, right? Well, the story begins in 2016 where one of my roommates in university was a TA. So a TA is a teacher's assistant, which is someone who helps professors mark assignments and teach sometimes as well. And you get paid for that. And you only get offered a TA position if you were a good student, right? And my roommate was a pretty good student. He had way better marks than me, so I could never be a TA. But he was marking assignments, and he had a lot of assignments himself that he needed to do. So he was really low on time. So he needed help marking the assignments. And you have the answer key with you. So it doesn't take a genius because you can just compare the answers and then mark the assignments. So he was like, "Hey, Andy, I'll give you the answer key, and why don't you help me mark these assignments for me, and I'll pay you in Bitcoin in return." So my roommate paid me in Bitcoin $50, 50 Canadian dollars worth per night of marking the assignments. And back then, it was only a few $100s per Bitcoin. So $50 worth of Bitcoin nowadays doesn't sound like a lot, but back then it was a lot of Satoshis, okay? So I was like, okay, great. I don't really know what this Bitcoin thing is, but I'll do it. So I got $50 worth of Bitcoin here and there. And now I had all this useless money. And like, that's what I thought, right? Now that I had all this useless money, how am I going to spend it? So the only place that accepted Bitcoin was Steam. So if you guys don't know what Steam is, is a video gaming platform made by a company called Valve. And basically, Steam had a store where you can buy games, PC games, right, and play on Windows or Mac. They're mostly on Windows. But yeah, so I spent almost all of the Bitcoin that I earned, or a large portion of it, on this game called City Skyline, and I never played it. So it completely ruined the game for me because now I can't play City Skyline because every time I load it up, it just reminds me of how much Bitcoin I spent on it. Yeah, totally ruined that for me. Fast forward a year or two. This was December of 2017. So, if you guys remember what was going on with Bitcoin prices in December of 2017, it was in the peak of the mania phase. And this was, I think, the day before my 22nd birthday. I was on an internship at RBC at the time, and this was pre-COVID, of course. So everyone had to go to the office 5 days a week. There's no work from home. I lived with my parents at the time, and I had to take the train downtown to Toronto, and it's a really long train ride. So my parents lived kind of far away from downtown Toronto, so it wasn't over an hour on the train. So every weekday I had to get up super early, and I'm waiting on the platform for the train, and I'm super tired and super cold because I got up at like 5 a.m. And I was miserable and decided to check the price of Bitcoin. So yeah, I think that was the day, or if not the day before, that Bitcoin peaked around 20K US dollars. And at the time, I opened up my finance app and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. This is the biggest bubble I've ever seen in my life. And then in 2018, you guys remember what happened in 2018, right? So fast forward a year from that, or less than a year from that, Bitcoin crashed down to like 3K from 20K. Just forgot about it for a couple of years after that. Now, fast forward then to 2020, so we're getting to recent times now. A company called MicroStrategy decided to add Bitcoin to their balance sheet. So, MicroStrategy, I'm sure if you have been in the Bitcoin space for 5 seconds, you would know MicroStrategy, who is led by the eccentric billionaire Michael Saylor. Yeah, he basically sunk the entirety of his balance sheet of MicroStrategy into Bitcoin. And I thought that was an interesting play. I certainly didn't understand it at that point. I just thought it was interesting, right? So why would a billionaire CEO gamble his entire company on magic internet money? Then I forgot about it again, but this time, a few months later, one of my friends told me that he was buying Bitcoin. Now, this is how a lot of people get into Bitcoin, I think, where you can have all this news and you can have all this development and all this stuff coming at you, but it doesn't really click. It doesn't really click for you until one of your friends or family members really get into it. So this friend was a heavy fundamental and value investor. So I would describe him as kind of the disciple of Warren Buffett, I would say. So he's a heavy follower of the school of value investing. And obviously, as you guys know, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, they both hate Bitcoin, right? So yeah, I was like, how much crack are you smoking to be buying Bitcoin? And I was saying that at face value, but deep down inside, I was like, maybe I did miss I did miss part of the story, or there's a possibility that I was missing part of the story. I began to do some research, and what I found just blew me away. Now, that's my supervillain origin story, and by now you're probably wondering, okay, but what did you find about Bitcoin through your research? Hold on, I'm getting to that. Although I think that to fully explain everything will probably take more than one episode, but I'll just begin somewhat explaining it in this episode. If you're a skeptic or if you're just a beginner in researching all of this, let me just try to boil down the basics for you and what really clicked for me. So, before I even begin talking about Bitcoin, let's talk about some basic first principles. If there's one thing that you should take away from today, I want you to remember something called the Axiom of Money. So, an axiom is a statement or proposition which is regarded as being established, accepted, or self evidently true. Now, that's the definition I stole from Google. The axiom of money states that work or some other tangible effort must be expended to create new money, otherwise, that money's value trends towards worthlessness. So let me rephrase that in simpler terms. So basically, all I'm saying is that in order for a money to be worth something, you need to actually work for it, or you need to give up something valuable to get it. If you can poof money into existence from thin air, then that money eventually becomes worthless. So I want you to take a moment and think about whether this axiom is true. So let's go through a sort of concrete example. Let me ask, why is a pair of shoes worth more than a rock? Well, you could say a pair of shoes, they protect your feet. You can actually use them, or you can sell them and give them to someone else if they're not the right size, even. So even if you can't wear them yourself, there's some value that someone else can find through it. Versus a rock, well, there's plenty of rocks, and unless it's a special rock or something like that, then a rock might not be worth that much because you can just pick one off of the street and it takes you no effort to go outside and just pick up a rock. So throughout this example, you can see that work and value are inextricably tied. So historically, we used gold as money. Now, for gold to be as money, someone had to first mine that gold out of the ground and refine it and cast it into a coin or bar. Now, gold is rare, so it's not that easy to find. And yeah, once you find it, you have to dig it out of the ground again. Let's think about the money, though, that we use today as fiat currencies. So fiat is a Latin word that means something like let it be done. And the money that we use today, whether it be US dollars, Canadian dollars, euros, yen, they're all fiat currencies. The government of each respective country can just say, well, it's worth whatever we say the money is worth, and then let it be done. However, tying this back to what we just talked about, you'll find that fiat currencies violate the axiom of money. The government could at any point print however much money they want instantly at their discretion. And these days, money is created digitally. So when I say print money, they're not even printing the money. I mean, they're not printing the paper money. They don't even need to get paper. In other words, money is created right now. The government fiat money is being created without any work being expended. Now, why is this a problem? Well, most people in society are workers, meaning that you have a job where you provide your labor in exchange for value. Now, your labor is worth actual value, I'm assuming. Well, hopefully it is. And it increases the productivity of society. So it increases the value of your company, or it makes others' lives easier in some way, shape, or form. But in return for your labor, you're now getting paid with money that was ultimately created out of thin air. So this creates a fundamental imbalance. So in simpler terms, as a laborer, you're always exchanging your real value for something that was created out of thin air. And if you're the government, then you could always buy real value in exchange for something that you created out of thin air. So if you're the government, you think, wow, this is a pretty sweet deal. Why would I ever stop doing it? And if you have any doubts as to whether this is actually problematic, consider the reverse. If printing money out of thin air did not cause issues, then the government could just print more money and start handing it out, right? Giving it to everyone, give everyone more money, and everyone would live happily ever after. You could get every politician to have a stack of $100 bills and start hanging them out in front of every single government building. And in fact, that's what the governments of Zimbabwe tried to do in 2009. And that's what the Venezuelan government is doing right now. So this leads to an effect called hyperinflation, which is when the money supply is increased so much that people basically cannot use the money anymore. They stop having faith in the money that they're using because it was just printed to oblivion. Again, this wouldn't happen with something like gold, which again requires work to mine and is limited in supply. So, y'all seeing where I'm going with this? Well, let me just leave it here, and we'll cut it short for episode one. And in episode two, we're going to talk about the implications of this and how this relates to the great technology that is Bitcoin. So, thanks for listening. Again, this is the Bitcoin Advocate podcast. My name is Andy, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Be sure to subscribe. Thank you.